Today's topic is around creating a culture of security and going over some of the current cybersecurity trends that we are seeing at Eide Bailly with all of our clients and what we see across the industry. A little bit about me. I've been in IT for the last 2 decades-ish. And for the last, better part of the last decade, I've been in security leadership positions, primarily around financial institutions and building cybersecurity programs from scratch. And when I say from scratch, it's never really from scratch because we all have things that we have in our environment like EDR or antivirus or backups and email filtering and all that. But what I was able to do was formalize that into a dedicated group of individuals to be able to respond to threats and building that team up to the point where we were able to provide confidence to our corporate board of directors that we had it handled. Not only were we telling them that we had it handled, but we were also proving that we had it handled. We were using offensive testing sprints with other assurance partners and using that to be able to do live sparring matches, essentially, against our defense, against our internal team of defenders, and measuring our ability to protect our organization throughout the attack chain. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I think it's really important to start off with an understanding that we don't get to choose if we're the target. A victim never chooses to be a victim. What I mean by that is there is both targeted and opportunistic cyber attacks out there. And those opportunistic attacks are just trolling along. They're scanning the internet, looking for weak ingress points, weak spots to get into our networks that we're trying to defend. They're sending phishing emails. They're looking for people that may not have been properly trained. They're looking for maybe people that are properly trained but made an accident, and we don't have the proper technical controls to reduce that blast radius around what can happen when we visit malicious sites or receive malicious emails. And so it's really important to think that just because something hasn't happened to us yet doesn't mean that we're safe. It just means that it hasn't happened yet. So again, the victim never chooses to be the target of any of these things. Every day in the news, we're seeing headlines, and whether it's in your local state, whether it's in national level, whether it's other countries, whether it's the country of Costa Rica that recently went through a giant cyber attack that shut down all IT essentially for their entire country and government services. Whether it's ransomware, whether it's supply chain, whether it's somebody actually accidentally paid somebody the wrong amount because an adversary changed payment details for a vendor, whether it's somebody adding ghost employees to payroll systems or changing payment details for legitimate employees. We're seeing all this in the news, and it's almost overwhelming. Well, not almost, it is overwhelming at times, just seeing the constant drumbeat of all of the bad that's out there that's happening to everybody else. And it's easy to think that, well, we don't have anything to protect in our environment. We're not that important in the eyes of the attacker. Again, we don't get a pick. And even if we truly have nothing to protect, if nothing of value, the adversary cannot extract money from us or monetize the attack in some way. Even if that's all true, we still have to recover from the attack. We still have to restore our systems to a known good state. We have to get our systems up and running again. All these things, we still have to be able to support our customers and the reason why we are in business. Cyber risk is business risk. This isn't cyber risk for the sake of saying cyber with everything that we say cyber with. This is impacting our business's ability to serve our clients. It's impacting the trust that our clients have with us to protect their data. It's providing the integrity around financial transactions. This is business risk. This is a risk that has the ability to interrupt our ability to serve our clients. This is a significant risk, and it can put us out of business. And again, that starts to affect all of our employees. That affects us. This affects our communities. This affects everybody around us. So what is cybersecurity? Well, in the old days, we used to talk about information security. This is the same thing. We're talking about the protection of our IT systems and networks from malicious actors, people that wish us harm, that are trying to create an ecosystem where they can monetize these attacks. They're really all about the money. This is about disrupting your ability to do business. This is about extorting. This is about manipulating financial systems. This is about trying to get you to intentionally send money to the wrong places. This is about stealing data. This is about everything that we hold dear as businesses and what our clients or our customers are trusting us to do. When we start talking about how these adversaries, these malicious actors, are doing what they're doing, you don't just jump to encrypting everything. You don't just jump to stealing everything. You don't just jump to stealing all the money. An actor has to follow the same rules of physics that we as defenders have to do. They can't just jump to the end. So they need to get malicious code on an endpoint. They need to be able to remote control that computer that they've just compromised from somewhere else over the internet, because they're not physically, typically they're not physically present in your environment. It's virtually. They have to be able to elevate privileges, because hopefully you're not having all of your computers using just administrative rights all over your network. They have to be able to survive a reboot. They have to have some sort of mechanism for persistence put in place. They have to be able to find other computers in your environment. They need to go through discovery processes. And then they need to compromise additional systems within your environment and continue rolling over and over throughout the network until they find what they're going to take action on, their objectives. And so is that ransomware? Is that stealing money? Is that stealing data? Is it all of the above? But they need to get to that point, and you can't just jump to the end. You got to go through these different steps in order to get there. So let's talk about ransomware. This is very pertinent to us because based on recent studies, so in 2021 here, this is primarily centered around the United States. And again, this is just on reported incidents of ransomware. There is almost certainly a large number of ransomware incidents that are not reported about. This is a United States problem. This is a worldwide problem, but this is focused in on us in the United States. And why is that? Because we're one of the leading countries in the world. We have things like cybersecurity insurance that is the norm to help protect us and recover through these types of incidents. So we have money from an insurance side of things. The whole economy of the global monetary system is set on the dollar standard. We are the target in this country, and it's not just large businesses. It's also focusing in on small businesses. So you may think that I'm a small, tiny business. What do I need to worry about? This country is founded on small businesses. You are a target. The business impact. So the highest ransom demand recorded since 2020 is $240 million to end the ransomware attack. The average is just short of $250,000 since 2020. What does it mean to your company if suddenly you have an unplanned $250,000 expense? How do you handle that? Does that put you out of business? Does that create an issue for making payroll? Does that prevent you from buying supplies so that you can continue to fulfill your clients' orders? 22 days average downtime associated with ransomware. I just the other day read an updated statistic that based on the last quarter of last year's fourth quarter of 21, this is decreased to 20 days. So we're getting slightly better. But what does 3 weeks mean to your organization? What happens if all IT systems go dark for weeks at a time? Where I used to work in executive leadership, we had decided that our business would be substantially different. We wouldn't go out of business, but things would be substantially different from a customer perspective, from an employee perspective, from everything that our business did after 3 days of IT being dark. After 3 days of downtime, our business was dramatically different and with significant impacts to our employees, to our clients, to our partners, to everybody. So what does 3 weeks mean to you? If you're a manufacturing facility and you can't run your manufacturing line, your lasers or your stamping presses or whatever you have going on, what happens if you can't turn those machines on for 3 weeks? What happens if you have financial reporting requirements and 3 weeks is in the wrong time of the year and suddenly you have regulatory concerns? What happens to your employees after they miss a payroll? How many employees will still show up and work for you if you can't figure out how to pay them sometime in that 3 weeks of downtime? And the average dwell time since 2020 for ransomware, from the point of them getting malicious code on an endpoint in your environment to the point where encryption has taken hold of the environment and they're demanding ransomware, is 9 days. Can you identify that a malicious adversary is in your environment within 9 days? Are you watching? Do you have something monitoring? Can you even tell if an adversary is doing bad things in your environment or if one of your assets has been compromised? This also has a people impact. So a recent study by Cyber Reason, so in 2021 here, they recognized through all the ransomware incidents that they had responded to, of those companies that had ransomware, 32% of those companies lost top leadership, either through dismissal or resignation. Either they said it wasn't worth it or they got asked to leave. And these are CEOs, these are CFOs, these are CIOs, these are IT leaders, these are business leaders, these are people with key knowledge that you depend on every single day in order to run your business. What happens if you go through an incident like this and you're part of the third of companies out there that lose somebody important? How are you going to replace that institutional knowledge? All of that insider baseball that you use to create and run your business. They know how you've solved problems. They know how to engage with vendors. They have the relationships both within and external to the organization. What happens when you lose those people? 25% of companies that experienced ransomware were forced to close for a period of time. How does this impact our friends and our family and our employees and our communities when unplanned downtime impacts people's paychecks? What happens when 29% of the companies that go through this are forced to eliminate jobs because their business looks different now because they were forced into paying $250,000 that they weren't planning on? They can no longer expand. They're just focused on keeping the lights on. How does this affect people's ability to pay their mortgages, put food or groceries in their fridges? How does this affect your communities and their abilities to take care of their families? This is local to all of us and it's very, very personal. How are we gonna make sure that our employees that we're trusting either our IT staff or somebody on our behalf to protect us, how are we going to ensure that that doesn't impact our employees? When we start thinking about magic versus logic, again, ransomware isn't magic. It has to go through those certain steps in order to get to encrypting everything. And we can look at all of the previous events, ransomware events that have been documented, and understand what were the things that caused them to get the initial access, that the malicious code execution in an environment. How did they get in? How did they persist? How did they be able to survive that reboot type scenario and not have to recompromise a computer? How did they elevate privileges? How did they evade our defenses? How did they discover more assets to compromise? How did they move within the environment? How did they get their ability for command and control, that ability to remote control a compromised computer for somewhere over on the internet? And how did they steal data? And then how did they deploy their encryption mechanism for the ransom that they're going to be demanding from you? Again, this isn't magic. We have documented all the previous cases through an organization called MITRE. They have the MITRE attack matrix. And these are the principles and the techniques that adversaries are using to compromise our networks. So this isn't magic. We can look at these details and we can design our defenses around what has happened, what is currently happening, so that we understand that this isn't just one single technical control. We're solving for a whole behavior that we can control and modify. Every single thing that we can put in place as we reduce our attack surface so that we can focus in on protecting less stuff forces an adversary to make a decision. And the more decisions that we force an adversary to make, the better the chance we have of catching this while it's still an incident, while it's still just an intrusion before it becomes a ransomware incident. So this becomes really important to understand all of these things that lead to compromise, to lead to ransomware, so that we can make decisions based on actual knowledge rather than a feeling on how to protect our environments. And then just because we've forced an adversary to make decisions, just because we've hardened our environments, doesn't mean that if we're not watching or don't have somebody watching, that we're going to be able to defend themselves. We need to make sure that we have somebody watching, either through a managed services type situation, or IT staff or somebody in the business that knows how to monitor for these alerts, ask the right questions, and respond in a timely enough fashion. Let's talk about third-party risk. So we all have vendor relationships that we depend on in order to run our businesses. SolarWinds is an IT software provider. And so this IT software provider is used to be able to understand if a system is having downtime, sending out alerts, to be able to monitor bandwidth usage, be able to monitor performance across our servers or our endpoints, understanding where there's things that are going to challenge the availability of all of those things that we depend on to run our business. This is the monitoring solution that I would say hundreds of thousands, but I don't have any facts to back that up, but a lot of companies in the world are using to monitor their systems and monitor for uptime. And in 2021, a malicious adversary traced back to Russia and state-sponsored hackers compromised SolarWinds. Now, SolarWinds, along with many other software or services providers, has included in it a update mechanism to keep its software up to date and apply those newest patches and updates. The adversaries compromised specifically that update mechanism, and they use that update mechanisms to start delivering malicious code to very targeted companies, and then use that malicious code to further work their way in, again, throughout that whole attack chain, and completely compromise these organizations. And so this becomes important to us to understand, what controls are we putting in place when we engage with a third party? How do we know what normal is? And how do we know what not normal is? And how are we going to alert on that? and who is going to be monitoring what normal versus not normal is. Again, going back to who's watching and what types of controls and situations are put in place to make sure that these vendors that we are trusting can only do things within a certain limited realm that they need access to. CASIA is a platform that IT companies that do work on behalf of other companies use. This is a managed services platform that an IT organization that provides services to a business like yours uses, and they were not properly protecting this platform. CASIA wasn't. All of those IT vendors using this platform, it was a race condition with the ransomware operators, these malicious actors that compromised CASIA. They pushed out ransomware across approximately 1,000 different managed IT providers, and then all of their clients. This was a huge disruption for thousands of businesses worldwide, getting ransomware pushed through their IT provider by a compromised platform through basically a patch management or a patch delivery system. And again, what kind of controls do we put in place from that managed IT provider? What type of controls do we put in place to make sure that we're monitoring these things from our side? And what plans do we have for recovery if something like this happens to us? Let's talk a little bit about business email compromise, another area that we're seeing. So the FBI puts out a great how to commit fraud in 4 easy steps. And this is really how simple it is for the malicious adversaries to do this. They are sending emails or they're sending emails from pretending to be someone else, or they're compromising companies and then using their email systems to contact people that they would normally do business with. They're using the same language, referencing things that they've talked about in the past, but it's not who you think it is. It's the adversary who is controlling that email account, not who you normally correspond with. And then you're convinced that you need to change payment details for one of the vendors. Your vendor has changed financial institutions and needs to change that. Only again, it's not who you think it is, it's the adversary. And then you're paying invoices, but to the wrong financial institution. And you don't know this until the legitimate vendor comes back weeks, months, whatever the case may be later and says, okay, here's my invoice, I need to get paid. And you think you've already paid. I used to work at a financial institution. If you don't find out that you have sent a wire or an ACH or a transfer of funds, however you're doing it, within the first 24 hours, and then sometimes within the first 48 hours, you're not recovering those funds. You're in a cybersecurity insurance claim if you have cyber insurance for your organization, or you're eating that loss. This is a real thing. And speaking about real, this is a real incident, again, happening in 2021. School district was going through a construction project, building a new school. This happened in Texas. And so this is in the United States. This is within the country. One of their construction vendors was compromised. The adversary took over their email system. The adversary requested a change in payment details, changed the financial institution payment details for invoices, requested a deposit or a payment on an invoice for $2.3 million. They didn't find out about it until 3 months later. How do you go back and understand how you're going to get that money when it's been months since you thought you paid a legitimate email or a legitimate invoice to a legitimate company, to an invoice from a person that you legitimately do business with through email? but it's not who you think you're talking to through that email account. What kind of people, process, and procedures are you going to put in place to make sure that that kind of manipulation, that kind of change of payment details isn't affecting your organization? Ocala, Florida, this was, again, same type of situation. Airport construction funds, 740 grand, just poof. Vendor was compromised. Construction vendor was compromised. Payment details were changed. Airport construction funds are sent to pay what they think is a legitimate invoice to somebody that they legitimately do business with. Sent it to the wrong financial institution. The adversary cashed out, did further wire transfers, whatever they did to move it to something outside of the jurisdiction of the United States. 740 grand gone. What does that mean to your organization? We, in the past week and a half, I've been brought into conversations with clients, Eide Bailly clients, where manufacturing facilities have had a vendor compromised, and they've been wiring money according to invoices monthly for the last 3 months. How are you going to recover millions of dollars that have been sent to an adversary instead of your legitimate vendor who still needs to become paid? How are you going to overcome that? Is that going to shut your business down? Will your cybersecurity insurance even cover it? How about ransomware? When we talk about companies that, again, conversations I've had with clients of ours that have gone through a ransomware incident, how are you going to recover? Do you have a plan? Do you have immutable backups? Do you have the things in place to recover? Did you have anybody actually watching things up front to alert you when there was an issue before it became a ransomware incident? The cybersecurity insurance. This is the other trend that we're seeing. So before I joined Eide Bailly, so I joined Eide Bailly again for the second time in May of this year. Before that time, I had the advantage of meeting with probably 30 to 40 different either business leaders or IT leaders in the upper Midwest discussing cybersecurity insurance. I wanted to know if what we were seeing at my organization was what everybody else was seeing. And the common thread was between 2 and 3 times, 2 to 3x on premiums and half the coverage. This is affecting everybody. And I won't say that this is nationwide, those exact results, but that was what the people I was talking to were telling me. And it reflected across what I've seen personally. This is going to be a trend. There is so many, there's so many companies for so many years that have treated cybersecurity insurance as their incident response plan, as their IT security program. It doesn't matter. I'll get insurance. I don't have to implement controls. Insurance will pay if I have an incident. And all that has done is created an environment where insurance carriers and insurance brokers have lost a ton of money. And so what that means for all of us is it's not a foregone conclusion. We're not guaranteed to get our renewals anymore. We have to implement certain controls in order to get a new policy, in order to get renewals. We have to do things like multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection. We have to have good backups. We have to do privileged access management. We got to control admin privileges. We got to do email filtering and web security. Those are just the requireds, the top 5 things that have to be in place before you even pass go, before you even get to do your renewal. And then there's other things that are need to haves in place, the blue items. And in the general session, we'll break out and talk more specifically about this. But you're not guaranteed to get renewal anymore. And even if you get your renewal, if you have an incident, if you're not doing these things well, you're not guaranteed to get your renewal the next year. So what are some of the effects of a cyber attack? Well, first of all, don't lie about it or try to cover it up if you have an attack. This past month here, we've gotten to see the trial of the former Uber chief information security officer getting convicted for trying to cover up their 2016 data breach. I forget the exact charges, but he's guilty. And there's criminal charges. This isn't civil. This is criminal. This is federal court. This is a big deal. And this has the potential to not just be IT security leaders within the organization. This also has the ability to affect your legal department, your CEO, other business leaders, trying to cover up things instead of honoring your commitments for notifying according to breach notification laws, or lying to the FTC, or lying to your regulatory body that, nope, all fine here, no issues. If you've had an incident, you got to come clean on these things. This is going to become more of a thing going forward. This is case law now. This is setting a precedent. And so we can no longer just pretend that something didn't happen and that no one will notice. This is a big deal. Data breaches are on the rise. We all know this. I put up the slide with all the headlines. You look in the Washington Post, look at the New York Times, you look at the Wall Street Journal, you look at your local paper, you look at any of these things. There's going to be articles about this. It's a big deal. And it's not just about us in the business and our concerns. It's your corporate board too. It's your leadership committee or your advisors for your business. Every major industry has cybersecurity as one of their top priorities. Now, they may not be spending money on it, but they recognize it as one of the top risks to their business. When we start talking about things that are outside of ransomware, the average number of days to identify and contain a data breach is 286 days, based on data in 2021. This is horrible as all of us. Who's watching? Especially when we're in the situation of remote work, or even in the office. Who's watching to make sure that when there's a security event, or when there's weird, not normal things happening in your environment? Who's watching that? Simple ideas like malware and malicious adversaries or malicious actors are trying to do IT types of things to our systems, things that our IT staff or the people we pay to do IT for us would do to support our systems. Those types of things are what malicious code is trying to do. That's what adversaries are trying to do. So who's watching to see if not IT people in your company are trying to do IT things? And that's not necessarily a perfect situation, because we know that some people are troubleshooting on their own and we have more technical people, but it also gives us a head start to be able to help those people if there's an issue. So who's watching for those types of things? And there's fines associated with things. We have regulatory requirements in certain industries, healthcare, education, financial services. There's regulation around this. And then there's the cost per breach, or cost per record for a breach. This is for incident response costs. This is about providing credit monitoring services. This is hits to our reputation. This is decreasing the volume of business. This is impacts to our revenue. Those types of things throughout the whole life cycle of an incident. So keep this in mind. There are some people that are listening right now that are actively compromised, and they have no idea. This is a harsh truth. It hurts. Who's watching? Are you paying for somebody to watch? Do you have someone hired to watch? Are we doing the right things? Are we monitoring for these types of events? And again, it's not magic. We want to be focused on the right areas. We want to be monitoring throughout the attack chain. We don't have to be perfect in all of the different areas throughout the attack chain, but we have to be good enough in enough of them to be able to have confidence and prove that we have the ability to stop an attack while it's still an incident, or the adversary is still taking actions in the environment before they get to stealing the data, before they get to encrypting everything, before they get to manipulating systems and stealing money. We got to be watching. 60% of small companies go out of business within 6 months of a data breach or a cyber attack. This is, again, impacting our communities, our friends, our family, our employees. This is impacting things around us. This is personal. This is for all of us. Some of the other trends we see around best practices. What should we be doing to focus in on protecting those things that we all hold dear to us? We need to understand what are those gaps in our environment. Where do we need to beef up our controls? Where do we need to train people better? What kind of processes do we either need to change or put in place to protect us? What are those things? How are we documenting what we are doing? How do we make sure that we're testing and validating that those things that we expect to protect us are actually working? How do we maintain that? How do we not just assume that everything's working? How do we validate that things are working periodically to understand we weren't just secure yesterday, we're actually still secure today? And how do we have conversations within a business to increase the overall awareness in a way that's positive, in a way that can actually impact all of the people we work with? Are we doing training? Are we doing testing? Are we involving them in the results of that testing? Are we encouraging good behavior? But are we also providing them the tools to know that if there is something weird that happened, that, hey, I realize I just clicked on something that I shouldn't have clicked on, that they feel empowered enough to tell somebody about it. So again, we can get ahead of things before they become a breach, before they become an encryption event for ransomware, before we lose money as an organization. How do we turn our people into human sensors within our organization to understand what weird is, or that didn't seem quite right, I think I need to tell somebody? How do we create that situation within all of our clients or within all of our companies to make sure that they know they can ask and have a place to ask? How do we get away from that should be in place to knowing that it is? Those are two really, really different things. How do we get assurance that we are doing the right thing rather than thinking that we're doing the right thing? And I think this is where offensive testing comes in. This is where things like vulnerability assessments, where we're trying to identify, are the patch management systems working? Are we properly managing end-of-life operating systems that are no longer getting security updates? Are we properly managing the risk associated with vulnerabilities that have known exploit code for them? Are we properly securing our environment, or are there things associated with the attack chain that we can solve, that we can make our environments harder for an adversary, that are just dangerous and we should just drop everything to take care of it right now? This type of testing is how we get away from should be to it is. And that's a very important distinction. When we go through cybersecurity assessments, again, we're looking at identifying the gaps, making roadmaps, making plans. How do we get to a better state? You can't solve everything all at once, but you can work a plan. And so we need to understand where we're at now so we can create that plan, that roadmap of what do we need to focus in on? What do we need to do first to get to where we need to be, to feel comfortable with we are properly protecting our environments. Nothing is ever 100%, but are we doing what we need to do to feel that we're managing the risk of an attack and something disrupting our business appropriately? And then are we doing the remediation? Are we solving for those items? What is the plan for working that roadmap? Are we implementing systems securely up front? Are we solving for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in the systems that we already have implemented? And then how do we maintain? We want to make sure that we're working with our clients to make sure that this isn't just a point in time exercise. If we're just doing an assessment to do an assessment, that's a waste of money. We're creating roadmaps. We're helping clients get to where they need to be, and then we're helping them maintain it so we don't have to keep spending that same money on the same thing over and over and over again. We want to understand what's that maturity process and how do we get you there? And then how do we maintain it? We want to get you to a where you can properly be able to tell your corporate board or your leadership or whatever your situation is, or your owner, if it's just a privately owned company, that we feel that we are properly managing cyber risk because of this. And since we know that this impacts our ability to serve our clients, this is why we're handling it this way. So Waffle House. Waffle House is awesome. Waffle House is known by FEMA, and they have something called the Waffle House Index. This is how bad a disaster is in an area if the Waffle Houses aren't open and running. These restaurants typically run all the way up to a hurricane, sometimes through hurricanes. They're the last businesses to close. They're the first ones to open. They have jump teams and contractors staged ahead of time so that if they have significant building damage to one of their restaurants, they're ready to get the lights on and get serving customers as soon as possible, because they have a commitment to the areas that they serve, that when the worst happens, when houses and businesses are wiped off the face of the map in a hurricane or a tornado or whatever the case may be, people need to eat, and they're going to be there to serve their communities. And that's part of their company culture. They have alternate processing procedures, essentially. Same things we could have in all of our businesses. They know how to operate each one of those restaurants if they don't have ice, if they don't have coolers, if they do not have electricity, if they need to modify their menu because of refrigeration. They have all of this documented. They know what their playbook is and how they can respond to a disaster. It's a good example of all of us on what do we need to do. We know what our key processes are. In their situation, they know they need to cook food. Well, things that happen from an environmental perspective can impact their ability to deliver food to their customers, to their diners. They know how to work around it. Do we know how to work around those items that can impact our ability to serve all of our clients? What happens if a system goes down? What happens if a process fails? What happens if we don't get a key download from one of our vendors? What happens if we have a failure on one of our servers? What happens if a key individual gets sick and cannot come to work that day, and there's something that depends specifically on that individual? What happens if we require on a location and nobody can enter that location because of civil unrest, or let's say power's out, or there's some other disruption that keeps anybody from entering a certain facility? How are we going to overcome these challenges? How are we going to overcome cyber attacks? How are we going to overcome a ransomware incident? What pieces and parts are we going to put in place to ensure that we can continue to do business, that we can continue to save our business or serve our customers? Compromise is inevitable, but it won't ever happen to me because it's never happened to me before. This is something that I overheard from one of our clients just last month. So this is current to me. This sticks in my mind. And I thought, this is awesome. We have these biases in our heads that don't allow us to plan for things properly, just because we haven't had anything happen to us. Even if we've observed the neighboring business have to go through this, even if we know it's in the news all the time, even if we know that it's inevitable in our minds. We still don't take it seriously because we've never gone through it ourselves. We haven't felt that pain. To rephrase it another way, there's no experience in the life of the turkey that prepares it for Thanksgiving Day. There's nothing that's led up to Thanksgiving that would ever allow it to even comprehend that a disaster lies in front of it. Are we going to be prepared? Are we going to learn from other people's examples? Are we going to learn from other people's disasters and make our businesses more resilient? When we start looking at the incident response process, this isn't magic either. There's certain steps that need to be taken care of, and we need to identify what the problem is. We need to be able to detect an incident in the first place. We need to be able to contain it. We need to be able to eradicate it. We need to be able to recover it. We need to be able to learn and continue to create a situation where our environment gets tougher for an adversary to get in, where there's more decisions that we continue to force an adversary. If they just get in and are able to execute a LLMNR attack or something like that in our environment, they have admin credentials for everything in our environment in under 5 minutes from the point of malicious code being executed in our environment. There are certain things that just come by default with all the systems that we run that are so dangerous that they lead to immediate compromise in 5 minutes. Are we doing the things that we need to do to eliminate those easy choices for adversaries from our environments? Are we making it harder? Are we focused in on how do we reduce our attack surface so that we can focus in on watching less stuff better? And then do we have somebody watching that less stuff better? Or are we just trusting that nothing bad is going to happen to us because nothing bad has happened to us in the past? People that are prepared save money over people that aren't prepared. I think if we look back to other situations in all of our businesses where we were either prepared or weren't prepared for something that came up, we spend less time when we're prepared. We make less bad decisions when we're prepared for something to happen. We have less downtime. There's less of an impact to our business. The same thing applies to incident response or even business continuity planning. How are we going to prepare those alternate procedures? How are we going to understand what our key limitations are so that we have that documented and we can work around that? How are we going to understand what our key processes are within all of our different areas inside of our business? The accounts payable knows their key processes. Accounts receivable knows their key processes. Our CFO has key processes that they're doing. IT has key processes that they're doing. We have key processes for customer-facing individuals, but do we have a view from a company perspective of what all those key processes are so that we can recover things in the right order and that we're not missing a recovery step so that we can continue to save our clients? And this applies both to incident response for a cybersecurity incident and from just a generic IT failure, business continuity planning, those types of issues. Are we prepared? Have we been through these exercises? Key takeaways. I'm not going to read this. I think it's pretty self-evident here. I hopefully my passion comes through on this. I believe strongly that we don't have to just give up and surrender and just wait for the inevitable to happen to us. We can be proactive. We can understand what's going on so that we can properly protect our businesses. This is about properly managing risk for our organizations. And the last thought I'm going to leave everybody with here in this main session is, what are you going to do today to make tomorrow better? What did we learn? What are the things that you need to focus in on to make sure that your business has a tomorrow, that it has a next year, that it has a future? Because what we're talking about is hundreds of thousands of dollars or weeks of downtime if we're not doing things correctly. So how are you going to make sure that your business survives? What are you going to do to make things better? again, what are we going to do as business leaders or as key individuals within the business to make sure that we're properly planning for these things, for these known events that have a past that we can look at to understand how is it going to impact our environment? How is it going to interrupt our ability to serve our clients? And making sure that we're properly managing risk. I think that's really the key ending point, is how are we going to help our business survive when these things happen?